Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. This is the 19th part of What If Deku Can't Stop Adopting Kids. Hope you enjoy. Link to the original story and author in the description. Chapter 97, Breaking the Ice. Todoroki sighed as he shoved another load in the washing machine. After the whole incident with Kiba, Todoroki had been reduced to laundry duty this whole time. Which was a pretty small punishment, considering what he did. But it was definitely still a punishment. He had to hand-wash Kei's visors for one, and that was the easiest part. Fu's, Kiba's, and sometimes Shiroku's had to be put in a special wash to get the blood off of them. And oftentimes, he would have to wash them repeatedly to get all the blood off them. Sometimes Yami would have grim goop on his clothes, and that stuff required its own special wash, which was equally as much of a pain to get off. Netsu's and Otoko's clothes also required a separate wash, as they were made of special fireproof material that required more care. Fuku's clothes actually required him to wear a protective mask, as there could still be trace bits of her toxin on her clothes. And of course, they required their own separate wash as well. And of course, just the sheer amount of clothes he had to collect, wash, dry, fold, and distribute, was both somewhat tiring and painfully tedious. I can't believe UA has its students doing children's laundry instead of training. Shoto thought. Not like it would have done you any good anyway. Yonda said in his head. Shoto's eyes widened, and he looked around and saw the mind-reading girl behind him, smiling, looking up at him with a polite smile and a pleasant expression. Hello, Shoto. Yonda greeted him. I don't recall giving you permission to use my first name. Todoroki said, looking away from the girl to try to avoid glaring. He'd been avoiding this girl during his entire stay here, for obvious reasons, and now she's cornered him. Oh, but Shoto, we know each other so well. Despite your best efforts. Yonda giggled, her serene smile devolving into a sinister grin. But you didn't try hard enough. Although I guess I can't blame you for being drugged. Wait. While I was under the effect of those candies. Todoroki's eyes widened as he recalled what Yonda was talking about. He'd also been giving a love candy while he was talking to his sister, which caused him to suddenly go home and express his appreciation for her. It was very awkward for him, but on the bright side, his sister seemed pretty touched. But during the part of the day when he had been at the facility, while under the candy's influence, he'd completely let his guard down when it came to Yonda. Both in avoiding her and shielding his more private thoughts from her. It's quite wonderful to have a sister who's so determined to protect you, she even stays around her abusive father for your sake. I hope you expressed your gratitude to her well. Yonda told him, revealing just how much she knew. Damn it! Todoroki cursed. And what interesting information I've acquired. The number 2 hero is an abusive parent. I'm willing to bet he's responsible for that burn on your facing then. Yonda assumed. What do you want? Shoto had to change the topic. The more she talked about his past, the more he might reveal about his past. Yonda smirked. Tell me, dear Shoto, why don't you use your fire? I have no reason to tell you that. And you have no right to be so invasive. Shoto glared at her, but that just made her smile grow wider. Oh, but you do have a reason to tell me. Yonda giggled. It's not to tell you've been trying to hide this. Meaning you don't want other people getting involved. What do you think will happen if I tell my father about this? Who's to say he'll believe you? Shoto asked. Yonda rolled her eyes. Of course, he'll believe me. People are already suspicious of that burn on your face, and your extremely antisocial personality. It's already a somewhat talked about theory among people that Endeavor is abusive, not helped by his own personality. The only reason it's not a popular theory is because he's the number 2 hero, and people treat heroes like gods. If I tell Daddy about this, he'll believe it almost instantly. It explains so much about you that even if you denied it he wouldn't believe you. Shoto blared even harder at her. Damn her. So, either tell me everything I want to know, or I'll expose your little secret. Yonda offered. Blackmail. I'm sure your father would approve. Shoto retorted. Oh, I'm sure he'd be very disappointed. And that does weigh very heavily on me. Good thing he won't find out then. Yonda replied. Damn it. What am I supposed to do here? Shoto thought. She's got me with my back against the wall, and I can't even think of a way out because she's listening to my thoughts, you little demon child. Tick-tock Shoto, I don't have all day. Yonda said, taking a seat, looking at him with a very broad expression. Fine. Shoto caved. Because what other option did he really have here? Firstly, have you ever heard of quirk marriages? XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX. He told her everything. Mainly because she made sure no detail was left out in his story. Every important part of his life was revealed to her, no stone left unturned. So in summary, because your father is an abusive dick, you're not going to use your fire, because you got the genes to be able to have a fire quirk, from your dad. Yonda reiterated. Essentially, yes. I got this half of my power from him. And I will not give him the satisfaction of using it. Todoroki told her. Yonda stared at him wide-eyed for a moment. So you're just an idiot. That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And I've heard Mineta thinking he's not gonna die alone. How is my oath to myself dumb exactly? Shoto could feel his anger rising as this child continued to mock him. Oh, where do I start? Yonda sighed. Firstly, that whole thing about how I won't use his power. It's not his power. It's your power. It's not. Shoto was about to argue back. Don't interrupt me. Yonda glared at him, shutting him up. You're already testing my patience with your incompetence. If you start interrupting me, you're not going like what happens next. You're evil. Todoroki growled. Yonda rolled her eyes. I'm human. This is what humans do. Get over it. Speaking of getting over it, there's also another huge flaw in your oath. Your father's plan is to make you the #1 hero that surpasses All Might. Your plan is to become the #1 hero and surpass All Might. Without using his power. Shoto added. Right, now please explain to me how that actually matters. Yonda asked him. Your father's whole plan was to make a child stronger than himself because he believes that somehow means he surpassed All Might. You are his flesh and blood. If you become #1, he wins. It doesn't matter how you become #1, just so long as a child that he created becomes the #1 hero, he'll have completed his mission. That's not true. Shoto argued. He's always pressuring me to use my fire. I can see the rage in his eyes. He needs me to use his power. Yonda rolled her eyes. This is so sad. He wants you to use your fire because you'll never be the #1 her with just your ice. Yes, I can. Shoto asserted aggressively. I'm already the strongest in my class. Yonda facepalmed. Since you're so clearly deluding yourself, it seems I only have one choice. For your own benefit, and the benefit of the people you would fail to save if I don't act, I'm going to crush this false reality you have in your head. You're going to fight Ochako in the woods tomorrow. If you win, I won't tell a single soul about your father. If you lose, I'll make sure your dirty laundry is aired all over the news. And I'm assuming if I refuse you'll do the same thing? Shoto responded. Yup. Yonda confirmed. Then I guess I have no choice. Shoto accepted. I'll crush her completely. I'll crush her completely. Yonda repeated in a mocking tone. There you go again with that unlikable personality. I have to ask though. Why Uraraka? Shoto asked her. She's strong, but if you wanted me to prove my strength, I could just fight Dark Shadow in the dark. That would be a much more difficult challenge. Yonda snickered. Let me tell you a secret. Ochako is not your normal UA student. Although I'm sure you figured out that much. Even without the ability to read minds, you can tell something is up with her. Shoto nodded. I've figured as much. Her seeming to have multiple quirks. Her close relationship with All Might. Well, you see, that's because Ochako Uraraka is All Might's chosen pupil. Someone that he trained personally to become the next #1 hero. Yonda revealed. But right now, she still has very little experience with her power, which is why she breaks her arms when she punches at full power. But one day, she won't be breaking any limbs. She'll have strength and speed similar to All Might, with the added ability to manipulate gravity. Tokoyami is strong, but he can only get so much stronger in the future. If he beats you, you can just claim you'll get stronger than him. If you can't beat Ochako right now, at her most vulnerable state, before she can fully utilize her power, then you'll never be able to beat her at all. It's amazing how much thought you put into crushing a person. Shoto commented. Thank you. I put my full effort into what I do. Yonda said, giving him a cocky smile. Unlike you, that is. Well, I'm done here. I expect to hear that you've challenged Ochako by the end of the day, or else. Oh, and of course, you won't be telling anyone about this conversation. Right. Shoto agreed, much to his displeasure. Wonderful. I'll see you tomorrow. Yonda said, as she waved goodbye, and left Shoto to his laundry. So, that's what they mean by hellspawn. Shoto thought. XXXXXXXXXXXXXX. Ochako was confused. She had been training with Kiba when all of a sudden, Shoto came in and challenged her to a sparring match tomorrow. And he was very insistent on it too. Of course, she accepted, mainly because both Kiba and Shoto kept insisting. But why? Ochako sat on her bed, thinking over why Shoto, who up until now never really seemed interested in anyone, was so determined to fight her. And she also had to think over how she was gonna win. Todoroki was strong. One of the strongest in her class along with Bakugo and Tokoyami. And if she wanted to win, she was gonna need a plan. Knock knock knock. Hello? Ochako, can I come in? Yonda asked. Oh. Sure. Come in. Ochako told her. The door opened, and Yonda came in, with a saddened expression on her face. Yonda? What's wrong? Ochako asked, worried for the younger girl. I'm sorry. Yonda told her, doing an apologetic bow. I'm the reason that Todoroki challenged you. Huh? Ochako looked confused. I heard him thinking that you were weak, and I got really angry. Yonda lied as easily as she breathed. He said that he didn't understand why people thought you were a match for him, and I said you could beat him. And he told me not to tell bad jokes. He did what? Ochiko's eyes widened in shock. He said that since he was the son of the #1 hero, there was no way he could get beat by some country girl. Yonda continued to lie, without a speck of remorse. He was being a real jerk. I guess that's to be expected from the person who made Kiba cry. Oh, that little Ochako had to stop herself before she thought a bad word. Her anger rose with each thing Yonda said. I'm really sorry. I kept saying you could beat him because I got angry, and then he challenged you to battle. He said he'd crush that little farm girl and send her back to her poor slum with her parents. Oh, I'm gonna kick his ass. Ochiko's face turned red with rage. Nobody insulted her family and her financial situation and got away with it. Of course, she was far too upset to realize that Todoroki didn't know about her financial situation, so this was obviously something Yonda made up, having learned about via mind reading. None of this was in character for Todoroki, but since the boy deliberately isolated himself from the rest of the class, Yonda could say pretty anything about Todoroki, and people would believe her. So naturally, she exploited this to motivate Ochako. And boy was she motivated. Ochako gave Yonda a determined look, which made Yonda smile internally, but on the outside, she forced herself to keep frowning to keep the act going. Don't worry, Yanda. I'ma send him crying back to his papa. Achiko told her, her mood a combination of enraged and determined. You promise you won't lose? Yanda asked her, making sure to sound extra innocent. I promise. Achiko swore. Yanda finally allowed her smile to surface. Thanks, Achiko. I can always count on you. Chapter 98, Frozen Fury. It was bright and early the next day. Very early. In fact, the sun only rose less than an hour ago. And it was at the exact time that Achiko and Shoto agreed to battle. The two had gone deep into the forest, not wanting anyone to get hurt in what was obviously going to be a highly destructive battle. And Shoto was trying to figure out why exactly Achiko looked so pissed off at him. Uraraka, is there a problem? Yeah, darn right, there's a problem. Achiko said, giving him a harsh glare. Yanda told me what you said about me. What? Todoroki looked confused for a moment before he put two and two together. Wait, Yanda told you something? That's right. She told me all about how you thought I was some weak country girl. And that I should just go back to my poverty-stricken slums. Achiko ranted. How dare you? You arrogant popsicle. I didn't. Shoto tried to defend himself, but Achiko was having none of it. Don't try taking it back now. Achiko shouted, getting into a combat stance. If you're gonna say stuff like that, then you need to own it. Now get ready. 'Cause I'm gonna kick your frozen emo butt across this whole forest. That damn demon child must have lied to her to motivate her. Todoroki realized. Do I really seem like the kind of guy to say things like that? No. It doesn't matter. Clearly, she's not gonna listen to me. There's no point in wasting my breath. Fine, believe whatever you want, Todoroki said in his normal, extremely cold tone. He also adopted a battle stance and returned Achiko's glare. Are you ready? Yeah, Achiko said. On 3. We start. 1, 2, 3. The moment she said 3, Todoroki shot out a crap ton of ice at her, attempting to engulf her in ice right off the bat. Full cowling. 12%. Achiko shouted as pink lighting surrounded her body, and she leapt to the side, heading into the forest, quickly escaping Todoroki's line of sight with super speed. 12% last time she could only manage 7. Todoroki thought as Yanda's words came back to him. But one day, she won't be breaking any limbs. She'll have strength and speed similar to All Might, with the added ability to manipulate gravity. If you can't beat Achiko right now, at her most vulnerable state, before she can fully utilize her power, then you'll never be able to beat her at all. Okoko Uraraka. Todoroki heard something behind him, and he looked back to see a bunch of trees coming down on him. He created an ice wall behind him that cracked as the trees hit it, barely protecting him as some trees bounced off and others made it halfway through his rushed ice wall. How much stronger do you intend to get? Todoroki finished his thought, before he moved around his ice wall, and started pushing himself towards where the trees were being thrown, using his ice. He maneuvered through the forest, dodging a few more trees, before making his way to where Achiko was. Achiko kicked down a tree, grabbed it, took away its gravity, and threw it at Todoroki in the span of a couple seconds. Todoroki shot out another wall of ice in front of him, engulfing the tree, and moving towards Achiko to try and swallow her as well. Achiko undid her gravity, jumped forward high into the air, soaring above the ice before she reached the point where Todoroki was, and increased her gravity, sending herself crashing down on top of him at alarming speeds. Todoroki managed to push himself back with his ice, just barely managing to avoid Achiko as she crashed into the ground hard, creating a shock wave. Achiko returned her gravity to normal, before lunging towards Todoroki, getting so close to hitting him. Her fist was a couple of inches away from his face. But Todoroki once again managed to react in the nick of time, unleashing another ice wall that swallowed Achiko whole, encasing her body in ice. Todoroki moved himself to the side and stared down the ice wall. He doubted that would hold her for long. He needed to be ready for whatever came next. Crack! Todoroki heard a cracking sound, before Achiko burst from the ice, bringing a bunch of ice shards up with her. Achiko spun around, touching all the ice around her, reducing its gravity, before doing a spin kick, and sending all those big jagged shards of ice rushing at Todoroki. Meteor belt! Todoroki put up another ice wall in front of him, blocking the attack, as the ice shards embedded themselves in the ice wall. She's keeping me on the defensive. Todoroki analyzed, as he could feel the cold creeping up his body. I need to back her into a corner and overwhelm her. But when Shoto looked past the ice, she was already. Damn! I only looked away for a second. Where did she? Shoto's thought was interrupted by Achiko's foot planting itself into the back of his head, slamming him through the ice wall, and sending him flying. Shoto rolled across the ground, before moving himself upwards, and creating a wall of ice to stop himself from flying back any farther. Immediately there was a slab of ice flying at him. He made another wave of ice that engulfed the projectile, before traveling towards Achiko, and she, predictably, jumped back into the forest to avoid it, vanishing out of her sight once more. The next time she attacks I need to go all out, Todoroki thought. Pin her down. Unfortunately for him, her next attack would be similar to her first, in that she continued to catapult things at him. This time, instead of trees, it was massive boulders. This time, Todoroki had to make a much larger, much thicker wall, as rocks rained down from the sky, slamming into his ice, hard. As rocks and trees fell from the sky, Shoto found it ironic that he was now the one who was pinned. If he stayed here, he would have to keep reinforcing his ice wall as more things slammed into it. And if he moved he would be hit by one of the many other things falling out of the sky. He only had one way out, and it was gonna cost him. Quickly Shoto moved out of the protection of his ice wall and created the biggest wave of ice he'd made yet, having it zoom towards Achiko's location, hoping the attack would force Achiko to dodge and stop throwing crap at him. It worked, and the assault ended. Nothing else dropped out of the sky to hit him, and so after taking a second to breathe, he moved out, and immediately shot towards Achiko's presumed location on his ice. Shoto could feel the ice traveling up, through his body. It was so cold. And he, much to his horror, started to shiver. Damn it! I couldn't even land a hit on her. Shoto cursed. He could feel the throbbing in the back of his head where she hit him, and of course the frostbite that would soon set in. All reminders that Shoto was losing this fight. Sure, Achiko had likely spent a good amount of her energy breaking free of his ice and throwing things at him, but this was still very clearly going in her favor. If you can't beat Achiko right now, at her most vulnerable state, before she can fully utilize her power, then you'll never be able to beat her at all. How would he beat Achiko at her full power? Even if he won this current battle, that would still mean very little, considering that he would have barely beat her at not even a quarter of her strength. This fight has shown him so far that if she were at 100% power, she would wipe the floor with him. Heck, even at half her power she would wipe the floor with him. Of course, he could still improve. But could he really reach the same level as Achiko with just his ice? Shoto shook his head. No. I can beat her. I will beat her. I must be beat. Unfortunately, Shoto was so distracted by his own thoughts that Achiko managed to get the drop on him with a flying dropkick to the back. The kick sent the two of them flying forward, with Shoto getting knocked onto the ground, his face rubbing and grinding against the dirt, while Achiko rode his back like a surfboard. After a few seconds of this, Shoto started to slow down, and Achiko jumped off his back, letting him slide forward and away from her. Shoto slid a few yards away from her, before coming to a stop. With his face in the dirt, Shoto tried to pull himself up. His body was weak, and the cold was agonizing. If he was shivering before, he was shaking now as his arms tried to push him up. Only for Achiko to kick him back down, pressing her foot against his back on his left side. I can't believe you still aren't taking this seriously, Achiko shouted at him. I assure you, I am taking this very seriously. Shoto grunted, trying to keep his typical cold and distant tone, but his frustration and anger leaked in, making him sound far more emotional than normal. He made ice spread on the ground, to try and ensnare Achiko, but Achiko just jumped off him and landed a few yards away from him. If you were taking this seriously, then you'd use your fire. Achiko retorted angrily. Yonda told me everything. She told me you won't use your fire because you don't take anyone seriously. And even now when you're half frozen and losing, you're still not using it. If you'd used your fire when I was on your back, I would have been toast. I don't need to use his power to beat you. Todoroki growled, completely losing his composure, as he pulled himself to his feet. I can win. With only my ice. Achiko blared at him venomously. We'll see about that. Full cowling. 18%. The air shifted, as Achiko increased her power by 5%. The energy of one for all flowing through her veins. She grits her teeth, as she felt the power taking its toll on her body. But she'd endure. If only to put an arrogant dick in his place. Shoto sends another wave of ice at her, but this one is much slower, and smaller, as Shoto was struggling to continue fighting. Achiko easily dodged it, running around the attack with greater speed than before, and reaching Shoto before he could react. She got that much faster, from only a 5% increase. Shoto thought before Achiko decked him in the face, sending him flying into the wall of ice he'd created earlier. You know what really pisses me off? Achiko said, as she rushed forward, and beat Shoto into the ice. Smash! Everyone in UA is training as hard as they can. Giving it their all every day to try and be the best they can be. Smash! And you think you can be better than them but only giving it half your effort. Smash! How dare you insult my friends like that? Smash! Even Bakugo isn't that arrogant. Smash! Shoto finally tried to fight back, send out more ice in front of him that swallowed up Achiko, but she immediately broke out of it. And that was the final straw. I really just can't beat her. Shoto will finally crumble, as Achiko's fist came hurtling towards his face. Smash! And then everything went dark. XXXXXXXXXXXXXX. So I trust you all know why we're here, Izuku said to the other three people in his office. It was a full day after the events of yesterday's sparring match, and the two involved had spent pretty much the entire day recovering. Achiko had a few bandages on her, but Shoto was just covered in bandages and had bruises all over his body. He was also wearing special body temperature regulating casts on the frostbitten part of his body. And of course, his head was mostly covered by bandages for all the blows to the head Achiko had given him. Shoto and Achiko were both sitting across from Izuku, while Yonda was sitting in a chair next to his desk. Achiko looked very upset, pouting heavily while crossing her arms. Shoto on the other hand looked completely normal. Like he wasn't upset by the events of yesterday at all. At least that's what he looked like at first glance. If you looked closer you'd see his eyes seemed a bit empty. Like he just wasn't there. And Yonda had a completely neutral expression. Although who knows what she was actually feeling. She tricked me. Achiko fumed, sounding more frustrated than angry. Yonda had revealed the truth to her by now, not wanting her to continue to believe those lies she'd told her past the point when it was necessary. I am really sorry about that part at least. Yonda told her honestly. I did hate having to lie to you like that, but I knew if I didn't you might not take the battle as seriously, and they might lose. And I couldn't have that, it would completely destroy my plan. And what exactly was your plan? Achiko asked her, giving her some stink eye. Izuku sighed. Yonda, please tell them what you told me. Of course, father. Yonda said, before beginning her explanation. It started when I learned something rather interesting about Todoroki. Something he didn't want other people to know. Now normally I wouldn't immediately use this blackmail material, but there was something that had been bothering me about him for the longest time. The fact that he refused to use the other half of his quirk. Not only did he refuse to teach my brother because of this, but he also is hampering himself in a very dangerous way. What if he was in a situation where he needed to use his fire? What if he got himself or someone else killed because of his refusal to go all out? So I exploited the information I gathered and used it to make him reveal the truth. Once I realized the reason for him not using his flames was utterly Yonda. Izuku gave her a warning look. Come now father, it is ridiculous. Yonda pouted. Yes, but don't tell him that. He's been through a lot. Izuku told her. And I think you've hurt him enough, don't you think? Yonda rolled her eyes but didn't protest. Anyway, when I found the reason he didn't use his flames was not good enough to outweigh the downsides, I tried reasoning with him, but quickly found that was a pointless endeavor. Todoroki is a very stubborn person, not helped by the things he's gone through. Achiko frowned and looked at Shoto. She wasn't stupid enough to ask what he went through. Clearly, he wanted to keep that secret, but still. She was now very curious, and very concerned. Words alone would not help him. I need to shatter that false reality of his. That fantasy that he could become number one, while only using half his power. And that's where you came in. Yonda continued. Really, you were the only safe option. I needed someone who could beat Todoroki while he was only using his ice, so that ruled out most of your class, but I also needed someone who had lots of easy-to-see potential, that way he couldn't fall back on the, I'll just train to get stronger than them, argument. So that ruled out Tokoyami. Lastly, I needed someone who wouldn't accidentally kill him, so that ruled out pretty much all my siblings. I needed your fist to save Todoroki from his own delusions. And it seems to have worked. Everyone looked at Todoroki. She's right. He admitted, his blank expression not changing in the slightest. I'd been clinging to that oath for so long. Stubbornly refusing to acknowledge reality. But I can't deny it anymore. If I keep only using my ice, I'll never achieve my dream. Achiko cringed, as she really regretted going all out on him. Seems like she did as much mental damage as she did physical damage. She'd never seen a man so defeated. But she also didn't disagree with the notion that he needed to have what delusions he was having broken. She wasn't lying when she said that the notion that Todoroki thought he could become number one while only using half his power angered her. Except now she was far less upset about it because she knew the reason for him not going all out wasn't arrogance, although there was still some element of that, but some deeply personal reason. Right. My hopes are that either he'll shape up and start using his fire, or he'll give up entirely. Yonda shrugged. Either way, it's an improvement on his current state. Far less likely to get himself or someone else killed. Izuku sighed and had to resist slamming his head on the desk. I'm very glad you're trying to help people, dear, but I am very upset that your method of helping people is manipulating them and breaking their spirits. A broken spirit can only be repaired, and even made better. You know that better than anyone, father. Yonda reminded him. But you can't fix someone who's dead. Yes, you are correct. But that does justify any of this. Izuku tried to explain to her. There are other ways to handle this. How? Yonda asked, knowing full well what the response would be. Nothing. Izuku didn't have a response. Todoroki was not a child in his care. Nor would he be considered a child for much longer. Meaning Izuku had no legal right to force him into therapy, or force him to do anything that may help him. And while Izuku didn't know Todoroki all too well, he knew he was overly stubborn, and that talking alone wouldn't get him to change. In truth, Yonda was correct. Todoroki needed to get his ass kicked to see how hampering his oath was. Both to his safety and his dream. The problem was, if they waited for that to happen organically, then there was a good chance that Todoroki would just get killed. Or someone he was trying to save would get killed. Even All Might hasn't had the power to save everyone. Now imagine how fewer people he would have saved if he only used half his power. You don't even have to think that far, All for One would have just killed him. This was honestly probably the best thing to do for Todoroki, but he just didn't like it. And that's why Izuku wasn't as mad at Yonda as he probably should be. Because he understood that Yonda had only used such underhanded methods because she thought the situation was important enough to call for them. In her mind, she was saving Todoroki, and who knows how many other people's lives, in a way that couldn't be accomplished by being gentle or nice. And she wasn't completely wrong. What made it worse was that Yonda had done something similar recently. Telling him something very, very important that she'd learned via these manipulative tactics. It was hard to punish someone for doing a good deed in the most efficient way possible, even if the way she went about it was bad. And it's hard to explain why her methods were bad when he couldn't provide any reliable alternatives. Saying "trust me, everything would have worked out" does not work on someone this intelligent and pragmatic. So it put Izuku in a very, very difficult spot, and it makes him wish he had been harder on her during the Kyoko incident, as that is an example of her methods not working out how she planned, and someone getting hurt in the process. Although Kyoko would ultimately benefit from that in the long run, now that they knew what was up with her and could help her better. Izuku pulled out some calm candy from his desk, silently thanking Amai, as he ate it and felt a wave of relief wash over him. I mean, I get it, but you can't just do something like that. Achiko argued, giving Yonda a serious look. You hurt me and Shoto a whole lot. Do you understand that? Of course, I do. Yonda nodded. I understood exactly how much pain I'd be causing when I did this. But you're better off hurt than dead. I know doesn't apply to you, Achiko, you would have been fine either way. But I'm sure you'd be happy getting yourself hurt to save Shoto's life, so I figured I'd give you the chance to do so before it's too late. Achiko tried to form a counter to that. One more concrete than yes, but it's not nice, but was struggling here. Todoroki, how do you feel about all this? Izuku asked, concerned for the half-dead looking boy. I have no idea how to feel about all this. Shoto answered honestly. It was now clear to him that he had to make a choice. His oath. Or his dream. The world wouldn't let him have both. If he wanted to become number one, he had to give everything he had. And that included his fire. His quirk was made to use both. His ice would cool down his body if he overused his fire, and his fire would warm him if he overused his ice. Trying to just use one would result in more losses like yesterday. But that would please his father far too much, no. As Yonda pointed out, him achieving his dream at all would likely please his father. Shoto could simply not get everything he wanted, regardless of how much he tried. Midoriya himself was an example of how harmful chasing unrealistic dreams were and the benefits that came with letting them go. So really it was obvious he had to change his goals. So would he give up the dream he wanted so badly, and had held on to for years, just because it would make his father happy? Or would he could go on, using his flames? And try to ignore the searing hatred he felt every time he imagined his father smiling on the sidelines. But what would his father do if he just gave up? Well, he'd likely try his hardest to convince Shoto otherwise, but if that failed, what then? His father was not the kind of person to give up. Perhaps he'd find some other woman, and try again. Suddenly his blood ran cold, and he felt nauseous. The mere thought of his father starting over again with some other woman, creating who knows how many more children, and subjecting them all to the same things he'd subjected them to. Was that what would have happened if he went on trying to only use his ice? Would he have been deemed a failure like his siblings, and would his father try again? If that was the case, then he should be grateful to her for at least preventing him from that fate. Speaking Yonda, he was of two minds about what she did. On one hand, no one asked her to help him. He certainly didn't want her help, and she had no right to manipulate him and dig into his personal life like this. But on the other hand, she possibly just saved him from a horrible fate thanks to his own delusions, or at the very least saved him from looking like an idiot for the rest of his life. So there was that. He still didn't like her, at all. She was a smug little brat who was smart enough to get whatever she wanted. Heck, her whole plan went off without a hitch. Even getting caught by Izuku and punished was part of her plan, and that infuriated him. But at the same time, it was hard to reasonably hate someone who looks out for your own well-being without benefiting from it at all. Yanda actually stood to lose from trying to help him. She pissed off Achiko, made Izuku upset, and now she going to be punished, and she just accepted that for the sake of trying to help him. It was all just so very confusing. He'd have to take a long time to think about everything. Alright. Todoroki, as an apology for what happened, I'm giving you time off, and freeing you from laundry duty. Izuku told him. Achiko, I am terribly sorry you got caught up in my daughter's scheme, you can have some time off too. Yanda, you're grounded for half a week. No video games, internet, desert, or trips the city. Isn't half a week a bit too lenient? Achiko asked. I'd say at least a full week, considering what she did. I'm being a bit easy on her light of, well, let's just say, she discovered something very, very important, and may have saved all our lives, Izuku explained. What? Achiko's eyes widened in shock at the revelation Izuku just dropped. Even Shoto was surprised. I can't tell you what she found out, all I can say is, if she didn't find that out, your entire class would be in danger, Izuku said very seriously. It was that important. Well, I guess saving all our lives is grounds for reduced punishment? Achiko said, sounding very unsure of herself. I'm glad we agree. Izuku sighed. In all honesty, he was about as sure about this as Achiko was, but if save everyone's lives then you should probably get rewarded, and Yanda had refused any rewards that Izuku offered her. Of course what Izuku didn't know, is that the reason Yanda did that was because she already had this planned, and refused the rewards so Izuku have lingering feelings of gratitude when he was deciding her punishment now. I'll gladly take punishment for my actions. But I'm also very glad you can understand my intent. Yanda told them, standing up, and giving them all a big smile, and a curtsy. Achiko could please take me to my room so I may begin my punishment? I believe father has things he wishes to discuss with Todoroki. Achiko looked at Izuku to confirm, and Izuku nodded. Alright, let's go. And with that, Achiko took Yanda out of the room, leaving Izuku and Todoroki alone. After a few moments of silence, Todoroki spoke up. Can I have some of that clam candy? I think I'm gonna need it for this conversation. Sure. Izuku handed him one of his candy bars. As Shoto took a bite of the candy, he felt some of the weight come off his shoulders. It didn't make him completely calm, there was nothing that could do that right now. But it definitely helped. Maybe he should ask for more of these. So, I'm assuming you know where this is going, Izuku said, giving him a sad look. Of course, Shoto knew where this was going. After all, he lost the fight. Therefore, Yanda must have told Izuku about his father. Then again, he wouldn't have been surprised if Yanda would have told him even he won. You shouldn't get involved, Shoto told him. No one will believe you if you try to expose him. And you'll only end up hurting yourself. That may be the case for most people, but I have money, connections, and resources. I'm sure I can manage something. But? Izuku gave him a pained look. I can't do anything, right now. Shoto's eyes widened a bit. Not expecting that response from someone like Izuku. I can't afford to antagonize the number 2 hero, while some unforeseen powerful enemy is trying to kill me, Izuku explained, looking very upset at not being able to take care of the issue right now. Not to mention I also have a dangerous situation going on involving America, and I have to finish establishing the facility in full working order, so that way the whole thing doesn't collapse if something happens to me. If I take on something like this now, that would be extremely reckless, and my family would suffer for it. But don't get me wrong, once I get all that sorted out, I will be going for Endeavor. I'm not going to allow someone to do all that, and still be revered as a hero. Shoto looked at Izuku. He saw the ironclad resolve in his eyes. He wouldn't be deterred. Or at least Shoto had no idea how to deter him. Well, if you're going to interfere with my life, then I feel like I'm allowed to ask this, Shoto said. What did Yanda tell you that was so important? Izuku shook his head. You don't understand. This is on a need-to-know basis. I was told by Nizu himself not to tell anyone unless I absolutely have to. It's really that important? Shoto asked. Definitely, Izuku said, looking as serious as possible. If this information gets into the wrong hands, it's very, very likely that people will die. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. A few days ago, Aoyama was going back to his room, after finishing up with the dishes. He opened the door and was shocked to find Yanda sitting down on a table in the center of his room with two chairs, one she was sitting in, and one that was empty. On the table, there were some cheese, and cookies that looked like they had candies inside them. Hello, Aoyama. Yanda greeted him cheerfully, with a bright smile on her face. Ah. Hello, Madam Yanda. Aoyama greeted her nervously. During his stay here, he'd been very, very wary of this girl in particular for obvious reasons. He tried his best to avoid her, and when he was around her, he tried to make sure he didn't think of anything suspicious. What exactly are you doing in my room? Aoyama asked, trying not to show how nervous he was, or think anything sus. It's rude to invade one's room like this. My apologies, I just wanted to give you some cookies I made. Yanda said, raising a cookie up towards Aoyama, before giving him a teary-eyed look. You will eat them. Won't you? I worked really hard to make them. Oh, of course. Aoyama agreed, stepping into his room towards the table, and taking one of the cookies. The moment he bit into the cookie, his fate was sealed. This is quite good. Aoyama thought, feeling his nervousness melt away, and be replaced by a sense of serene joy. This was because the cookies were in fact filled with Amai's candies. Specifically, her calming and happiness candy, both of them at very high potency. You see, while Aoyama did his best to avoid suspension, that only made Yanda more determined to find out about him. And she picked up some snippets of information that she thought warranted a full investigation. You should sit down and enjoy them. Have some tea as well. Yanda offered, as she took out her phone and started playing some calming classical music. We haven't gotten much chance to talk, have we? No. I suppose we have not. Aoyama said, taking a bite out of the cookie once more, before taking his seat, completely forgetting why he was so worried before as the cookie completely disarmed him. Well, then this would be a wonderful opportunity to get to know each other. Yanda gave him a sickeningly sweet smile, as he fell right into her trap. Chapter 99, Clearing the Snow. Despite all of Todoroki's dramatic thinking earlier, he knew what his choice was going to be. He'd keep going on, using his flames. It was all he could do. Todoroki had spent his entire life training to be the number one hero, wanting to be the number one hero. Admiring All Might, and aspiring to be him. Not to mention he didn't want to risk his father starting over with a different woman and trying for his true masterpiece. He was going to make his father proud. And he was just gonna have to live with that. And so he'd been spending laying awake all night, coming to terms with that, and trying not to vomit. It was now early in the morning, and Todoroki was staring up at the ceiling, with bags in his eyes, dead tired but not in the mood to sleep. Knock knock knock. Hiya Mr. Roki. I heard you may not be feeling great, so I brought you some breakfast. Kay said on the other side of the door. Don't worry, it's ice and hot. On one hand, Todoroki really didn't want to deal with anyone right now, but on the other hand. That. Come in, Todoroki said in a very low and weak-sounding voice, thanks to him being super tired. Kay quickly opened the door and came in holding a tray of steamed rice, miso soup, and grilled fish. Here's your food. I hope you can rise out of your bed. By the way, Sato gives his best fishes. I'm begging you, actually begging you. Please stop. Todoroki never thought such small children could cause him so much pain. Sorry. I was having too much fun. Kay giggled. Okay, I'll stop. Thank you. Shoto sighed. Just put the food on the table. Okay, Kay said, doing as she was told, and placing the food on a nearby table. And then, she pulled up a chair next to his bed, sat in it, and started staring at him. Shoto let out a long-suffering sigh. "What are you doing? Why are you so upset?" Kei asked, ignoring his own question. "Please, I've had enough of being helped." Todoroki groaned. "Is it because your parents hurt you?" Kei asked. Todoroki let out an even louder groan. "Who told you? Was it Yonda?" Kei shook her head. "It was a guess. After all, most of the problems here are caused by bad parents." "I should have seen that coming," Shoto said. He wanted to be upset that in his sleep-deprived state, he let himself reveal his secret to yet another person, but he was honestly just too tired to even muster up his usual rage. "So is your daddy the reason you're so upset?" Kei asked innocently. Todoroki sighed. It was clear that the girl wasn't gonna leave him alone anytime soon, so he'd need to find some way to persuade her. "Yes. He's been stuck in my mind, and I'm very, very angry at him, but I'll have to do something that'll make him happy, and so I'm trying to accept that. So I need some time alone to think." "Why?" Kei asked. "Why what?" Todoroki groaned, wondering when she'd get the hint. "Why do you need to do the thing that'll make him happy?" Kei asked him, giving him a concerned look. "Is he making you?" He tried that and failed. Todoroki thought to himself. "No, this is something I need to do to make myself happy." "Okay, is something bad gonna happen if your dad is happy too?" Kei asked curiously. "The fact that he's happy is bad enough," Todoroki told her. "Is he gonna do something bad if he's happy?" Kei asked. "No, if anything he'll probably do something bad if he's not happy," Shoto explained. "I just don't like the thought of pleasing him after everything he's done." "Then don't think about it," Kei answered. "It's not that simple." Shoto immediately replied. "I can't just not think about it." "Why not?" "Have you tried?" Kei asked. Shoto opened his mouth to say something along the lines of course I have," before stopping and really thinking about that question. Had he really tried that? Did he ever really make an attempt to stop thinking about his father? At any point in time, last night, did he attempt to get his father out of his mind and go to sleep, or did he literally spend the entire night thinking about how much he hated his father? Literally allowing his father to take over his thoughts. Actually, when he thought about it like that, it was kind of pathetic. Looking back even further, did he allow his father to slip his mind at any point in time really? At school, at home, outside, he'd think about his father, what he'd do if he were watching him, and how much he wanted to screw him over. He'd think constantly about how to displease his father while he wasn't even watching. As if he thought that his father had some all-seeing or something. And now, when he put it like that, it sounded even more pathetic. So in truth, the answer to that question was absolutely not. Shoto accidentally answered as he stared wide-eyed at the ceiling. "Why?" Kei asked again. "Why do you think about him so much if you hate him? Will something bad happen if you don't?" Shoto took a second to think about that. Well, of course his father wouldn't be pleased if he just started ignoring him, but compared to what he was doing now, trying to spite him as much as possible, he'd probably prefer that more. And while he didn't like the idea of his father liking his actions, if did what Kei was suggesting and start ignoring him, rather constantly keeping him in his thoughts, maybe he'd be happier. "If you want to be happier, why don't you think of happy things?" Kei asked him. Shoto stayed silent. "What happy things? What would I think about if not my father? I can't think of anything that makes me happy other than cold soba. Is my life really that empty? Did it really take a couple of 8-year-olds for me to figure out how miserable I am? Or I guess how miserable my father was making me. After all, he forced me down this path." When Kei noticed Shoto wasn't answering, she frowned even more. "Are you having a hard time thinking about what makes you happy? Do you not want to be happy? Yami says you're always feeling sad or angry, and everyone else says you refuse to talk to them much, or make friends. So, do you just not want to be happy? I don't get it." Do I not want to be happy? What a ridiculous question. Or at least I'd like to think that. I guess if you look at it from an outside perspective, I refuse to get a hobby, or play games, or make friends, or do literally anything that might make me happy. Maybe it's not all my father's fault that I'm so miserable all the time. I mean, he's definitely at least part of the problem, but have I really done anything to make myself happy? Shoto thought. When I look back on my life, it just seems like I've spent half my time chasing an impossible goal, and the other half hating my father. Shoto looked over at Kei, who was staring at him with a concerned expression. How do you do it? Do what? Kei asked, looking confused. You've been through so much. Maybe more than I have. And yet here you are, smiling as if nothing ever happened. Shoto explained. So many people hurt you. Even now some people think of you as a freak or a monster. Don't you hate them? Don't just despise them with every ounce of your being? Why would I do that? Kei asked him, looking a bit upset. When my old parents, kicked me out, I did hate them at first. They were the first people I ever hated. It was my first time feeling like that. And it was gross. It made me throw up, and that was really bad because I needed all the food I could get. All hate does is make you feel worse, and make life harder. Mr. Roki, be honest, has hating your father actually done you any good? There was a long silence until Todoroki eventually responded. I can't really say it has. But still, it can't be that simple. These feelings, they can't just disappear on a whim. Maybe not. It's probably harder for you than it is for me, but I'm sure you can do it. Kei smiled at him. It doesn't sound like you tried at all, so I'm sure if you put in the effort, you can stop feeling so much hate and finally be happy with your life. She made it sound so simple. But Todoroki couldn't imagine just moving on like that. But it was probably worth a try, at the very least. XXXXXXXXXXXX. Achiko stood outside of Yanda's room, with a determined expression on her face. Alright, Achiko. Izuku's too nice, so you gotta scold her yourself, let her know what she did was wrong, and explain how people could get hurt. Achiko told herself. You know I can hear you, right? Yanda said from the other side of the door. Oh crap. Wait, ignore that word. Achiko quickly tried to recover from her blunder. Oh Achiko, I know pretty much every curse word by now. Yanda told her, with Achiko getting the impression she was laughing at her from behind the door. Why don't you come in? I've been expecting you. Okay, Achiko turned the doorknob and entered the room, to find that Yanda really had been expecting her. She was sitting down at a small table, with some tea already made. Still hot, implying that Yanda knew not only that she was coming, but figured out around the exact time she was coming. This girl is gonna be someone scary in the future. Achiko thought to herself. Thank you, I try really hard to give that impression. Yanda said, smiling brightly at her, before motioning to the seat across from her. Please sit down, I have a feeling this talk is going to take a lot of time, so it would be great if you could make yourself comfortable. I take it back, this girl is scary now. Achiko thought as she sat down. Yanda was just a very unnerving person. She knew everything going on in your head, nothing you thought was kept secret from her, and even now that she was grounded, and she knew Achiko was coming to scold her, she had a big friendly grin on her face, and acted like she was in full control of the situation. Now, before we continue, I would like to clear something up. Yanda told her, while she poured her some tea. What happened with Todoroki is absolutely not something I would do or would like to do often. I understand the consequences of my actions, being that they hurt people's trust in me, and they can be damaging to people's feelings. However, I really thought that someone's life could be in danger, so I thought this approach may be justified. And just like that, Achiko had to rethink what she was going to start with. Okay, what about Kyoku? Did you think Kyoko's life was in danger when you manipulated her? No. And had Yami not approached me, and then bribed me, I most likely would not have gotten involved. Given how quickly and easily Yanda said that, Achiko figured she likely predicted that she'd bring that up, and already come up with a response. In fact, now that Achiko thought about it, it was likely that Yonda had practiced for this conversation. But I saw a chance to help my sister, and get paid, so I did what I did. Was it right? No. And if I could go back, I would likely have tried a less manipulative and more subtle approach to finding out what was bothering Kyoku. I've learned my lesson from that example and will act accordingly going forward. You say that, but you still manipulated people to try and help them. Achiko pointed out. Well, that's where the comparison between then and now falls apart. Back then, if I hadn't acted, at worst Kyoku would become a, what was the word again, recluse. Something that, while sad, wouldn't completely obstruct her from living a long, happy life. If I hadn't acted here, the worst is that Shoto Todoroki would live an unfulfilled life attempting to achieve something that's beyond his grasp, and eventually encounter a villain that will overpower him using only his ice, and kill him, as well as all the people he was attempting to defend. Yonda responded. In other words, I don't think two situations are all that proportional. Well, you're not wrong. Achiko admitted, wincing slightly as she imagined Yonda's proposed, worst-case scenario. But you don't know that's going to happen. I would understand if you knew for certain that that would happen if you didn't do what you did, but what if none of that ever happened? What if he just learned to use his fire on his own, or if Principal Nizu or Aizawa helped him, or if that scenario just never happened, and he lived his life just fine using his ice? Yonda sighed. Alright, let's start with your last point. What if he lived his life just fine with only using his ice? Firstly, there are many villains who either have the ability to break his ice, or simply melt it, and he would be handily defeated by a good amount of them. At best he would need to be saved or supported by other heroes, at worst well, you know. And given how against working with others he is, it's far more likely that the latter will occur. And while it is entirely possible for him to simply never encounter these villains, it's about equally as likely for him to run into them, especially if he's gunning for the number 1 spot. As years go on and he's still not even in the top 10, he'll get more and more desperate to prove that he doesn't need his fire, until that leads his death. In fact, looking at all those facts, I'd say far more likely for him to encounter villains he won't be able to beat, than not. And as I said earlier, given his lone wolf nature, it's unlikely for him to have people around to help him should he get in over his head. Putting all those facts together, what do you think is the most likely scenario if Todoroki continued only to use his ice? It would be, really not good. Achiko cringed. She didn't expect the girl to completely dismantle her point like that. Exactly, so we're both in agreement that Todoroki needed to start using his fire, correct? Yonda asked her. I mean, I guess so. Achiko admitted. Perfect, now on to your first point, him getting over his trauma and learning to use his fire on his own. Yonda moved on. While that's not impossible, it's incredibly unlikely. Todoroki was clearly someone who so focused on his goal that he completely ignored reality and the possible consequences of his actions. The only way I was able to save him from his delusions was via a cleverly thought-out plan that would shatter any sort of justification in his mind for using only his ice, no matter how unrealistic it may be. Of course, this can happen naturally without my intervention, but it's not anywhere near assured. Let's say, for example, that you and Todoroki had fought during the sports festival. In that scenario, you would lose. Because Todoroki has a huge advantage given the arena, because you can only go forward, directly at him, and nothing is stopping him from spamming ice walls at you. And if anyone else beat Todoroki, like say Bakugo, he could just say to himself that he'll train to become stronger than them. I needed you to beat him because once he sees that even as strong as he is, he can't beat you at less than a quarter of your power, it'll be harder for him to justify thinking he can grow stronger than you, at least with just his ice. Bakugo doesn't shout 19% explosion. Nor could he beat Todoroki with that little power. It needed to be you. Of course, it is possible that you could beat him at the sports festival or in training if you used a higher percentage, but then that would defeat the point. If you beat Todoroki at 50%, then he might be able to delude himself into thinking that he can grow strong enough to beat you one day. The less power you use to beat him, the harder reality hits him. Again, not impossible, this realization could have happened some other way, but it's just very, very unlikely. Achiko stared at her in awe for a few moments. She put so much thought into this. Yonda pouted at her. Of course, I did. I was messing around with people's emotions and telling lies for the sake of trying to save someone's life. That's not something you do without thinking. I spent pretty much a whole day thinking over the possibilities of my actions or inaction. Well, I'm glad she at least thought it over. Achiko thought. Now on to your last point. Yonda said, not giving Achiko any time to think. About allowing Principal Nizu, or your teacher Aizawa, to handle the situation. And on paper, that may sound like a good idea. They're both supposed to be smart people, in charge of helping Todoroki grow as a hero, and be the best he can be, and more. Plus Ultra, and all that. One big issue I have with that. I don't know Nizu or Aizawa. You see, I'm not the kind of person who likes leaving matters to others unless I can be sure that they'll do what's expected of them, and do it well. And while I'm sure Aizawa and Nizu are at least competent, especially Nizu given his quirk, I have no reason to believe they will actually take interest and help him. Yes, they are his teacher and principal respectively. However, if Father's past has taught us anything, it's that teachers and principals can be completely indifferent to a student's plight or ill behavior. And since I don't know them personally, I have to do by their actions to see if they are those kinds of teachers. So tell me, Okiko, what have the UA staff done about Mineta's actions towards the girls? About Mina's reckless, thoughtless actions? About Todoroki's obviously troublesome mindset? Have you seen Aizawa, Nizu, or anyone at UA do something, literally anything to put a stop to these behaviors? Achiko took a second to think about that. What had UA done about Mineta's perving? Sure, the girls themselves would often smack Mineta around as punishment for his antics. But was that enough? And even then, should punishing students really be left up to other students? And what about Mina? Sure, she'd get scolded every now and again, and sometimes she'd get a bit more work. But clearly, that wasn't enough, as Mina didn't twice about absent-mindedly drugging her classmates. And had they really done anything about Todoroki? Sure, Achiko herself hadn't noticed how bad the boy's mental state was up until recently, but she was a student. Surely the teachers should be better at seeing this stuff and doing something about it. But to the best of her memory, UA seemed to have done nothing. Maybe it's just too soon. I mean, there is a whole 3 years for them to do something about those 3. Achiko rationalized. Endeavor. Yonda countered, giving her a deadpan expression. Now, I'm not going to give you any more information about Todoroki's situation than you already know. But since I can read your mind, I already know that you've figured out that Endeavor is the cause for Todoroki being the way that he is. Endeavor was also a UA student. So clearly, UA has completely ignored troublesome behavior in the past, so what makes you think it's different now? I don't think Aizawa was a teacher back then, but Aizawa is shown to expel any student he finds lacks potential, which sounds like to me as one who's difficult to work with. So judging from that, I have every reason to believe that Aizawa didn't just ignore Todoroki's troublesome mindset, he would expel him without trying too much, where then Todoroki would get picked up by a new school, because he's the son of the number 2 hero, and having him study at their schools is big reputation boost. Where they would likely do something similar to what Father's schools did with Bakugo, and treat him like a king, never challenging him or trying to change anything, allowing him to become a pro hero with only his ice. And we've already discussed why that's not good. Achiko really wanted to find a hole in that argument. Because she trusted Aizawa. And she trusted Nizu. But she couldn't deny anything Yonda said without lying, and lying wouldn't work because she could read minds. The only argument she had for trusting those two was, I know them and I trust them. And that was a very flimsy argument, and one unlikely to work. In summary, yes. You are completely correct, there is a chance that I could have not intervened and things would have turned out fine. However, there is a much greater chance that if I hadn't intervened, something truly terrible would have happened. Yonda told her, smiling at her gently. If you have any solutions that aren't extremely unlikely to work or extremely unlikely to happen or rely on unreliable factors, please tell me. I'm eager to learn what it is. And so, began a long period of silence. Achiko tried her best to come up with a satisfactory answer that didn't boil down to just trust me. You see, even though you have no argument against me, you're still convinced that I'm wrong. Why is that? Yonda asked her, in a tone of voice implying the question was rhetorical. You see, when you read people's minds, you quickly learn that everyone has their own truth. Something they either believe to be true or desperately want to be true. This can be the same thing as what's actually true, but there are plenty of cases where what people want to be true, or believe to be true, is very different from the actual truth. When this happens, people will often do everything in their power to try and confirm their own truth, and deny the real truth. This is what we call a delusion. Denying reality for the sake of a more comfortable lie. We talked about this with Todoroki. Todoroki believed that he could become the number one hero with only half his power. You, on the other hand, want to believe that there is a reliable solution to this problem that doesn't involve such underhanded and disliked methods. You can't think of this method, but passionately believe that such a solution exists. Because believing me would go against your own beliefs and values. The same can be said for my father, however, the difference there is that father understands how to compromise his morals to an extent, in order to help others. He's done it multiple times and will continue having to do it. He's even benefited from my methods before. Which is why he has a hard time punishing me. Well, that and other reasons, but we're not at that part of the script yet. That part of the script? Achiko thought, confused by that statement. You, on the other hand, have never had to make any major moral decisions before. Yonda said before her smile grew a bit. At least not knowingly. Achiko felt a bit of dread fill her, and a chill shot down her spine. What does that mean? Do you think it's moral to rig a competition? Yonda asked. No. Achiko didn't know where this was going, but it was scaring her a bit. You don't? That's interesting. Because you are aware that the very concept of one for all rigs the whole hero ranking system, right? Yonda pointed out. What? Achiko was taken aback by that. You really haven't thought about it, have you? Yonda shook her head, although she was still grinning ear to ear. Anyone who gets one for all is guaranteed to become the number one hero. You get all of All Might's incredible power, and more, as well as your own quirk. Tell me, do you think anyone can surpass All Might in power? Excluding All for One? Achiko thought about that for a minute. It was really hard to imagine someone with a power that surpassed All Might. Even in the new generation. Sure, Bakugo and Todoroki were strong, but she couldn't imagine them growing stronger than Star and Stripe, let alone All Might. And she was going to get stronger than All Might. Add that to her gravity manipulation power, and they didn't stand a chance. It wasn't even close to fair. It's not that simple. Achiko told her, sweating a little bit as tried to explain. Being number one isn't just about power. It's about how many people you save, your popularity, and how well you work as a hero. Oh, Achiko, you'll be able to move faster than every other hero by power walking, of course, you're going to save more people and stop more villains. Yonda told her. And power sells, you know. When people think of All Might, some people may think of his smile, but most are focused on his incredible power. People will gravitate towards those with power and worship them. And as a person who'll get even stronger than All Might, inevitably your power will attract that same worship. Even if you didn't want to be the number one hero, you'd still likely become number one anyway. That power is not exactly something that can be kept under wraps. Tell me, Achiko, are you going to try your best to do your job as a hero and save the lives of the innocent while taking down villains? Yes. Achiko answered in her head instantly. Then you're going to become the number one hero. Because you'll be able to do those things faster and better than everyone else. Yonda explained. Everyone else beneath you will try more and more to grow as strong as you, or more popular than you, but they'll never succeed. And next generation, it'll repeat, with someone even stronger taking your place. And the best part, people still think they have a chance. They don't know about one for all. They don't know that a quirk can't get that strong naturally. So they still think they have a chance. Imagine this, let's say that someone like my father is born, but with a strong quirk. He dreams of becoming the number one hero. Spends his entire life working and training towards becoming number one, all without the knowledge that only the person selected to get one for all could ever really be number one. He works in worlds towards his dreams, but his efforts are for naught. Imagine how crushed he must feel, year after year, to not be able to achieve his dream. Now imagine how he'd feel if he knew the game was rigged the whole time. Achiko was now feeling a little sick to her stomach. When she laid it out like that, the hero ranking system really did just raise people's hopes, by placing a dream in front of them, and never allowing them to reach the dream unless they had one for all, or unless one for all went away. But that can't happen. One for all can be used to save so many more people, it needs to be there even if it means making the hero ranking system horribly unfair. Okako thought. So what you're thinking is, it's okay to hurt people's feelings, lie to them and break their spirits even, so long as it results in saving people's lives. Yonda summarized with a smile. Gee Achiko, that sure sounds familiar. It's not the same. Achiko thought. I'm sure it's not. Aside from scale, I'm sure I'm missing some big important detail that makes these two things different. But they are similar. Yonda told her. You made a choice to continue doing something that All Might started that goes against what you think is moral, and will ultimately hurt people on an emotional level, all the greater good. And you did so easily, that you didn't even notice until now. Now wasn't that a horrifying thought, that added to the sick feeling Achiko felt in her stomach? She'd gone against her own morals without noticing. It was that easy. At least Yonda put thought into what she did. But Achiko literally just noticed the implications of One for All's effects on the hero system, just now. Don't feel too bad. Literally, everyone is a hypocrite in some way. Myself included. Yonda reassured her. And while One for All does rig the hero ranking system, the hero ranking system was already incredibly unfair in the first place. Do you have a powerful flashy quirk? Do you have a likable personality, or at least can pretend to have a likable personality? Are you attractive? If the answer to any of these questions is no, then you're not becoming the number one hero. You may rank highly, but you'll never reach number one. At worst, you've turned the hero ranking process into a system that only lets a couple dozen people become number one, into a system that only lets one person become number one. And even then, it's not like you don't have to put in a fair amount of work. But my point still stands. I see, and here I thought Mina was thoughtless. Achiko shook her head. Oh, she is. Yonda grimaced. If you were as thoughtless as her, this conversation would have been much worse, for me that is. Speaking of which, we are at the end of the scripted presentation. The what? Achiko asked, staring blankly at her. Yonda then proceeds to pull out a huge script and push it in front of her. Here you go. You can keep it if you like. Achiko took a look at the script, and her mind broke for a second. When she got suspicious that Yonda anticipated this conversation and made plans for it, she didn't. That Yonda literally predicted everything she was going to say, all of her arguments and responses, and then wrote her own counters to them, which explains how she was able to respond to her so quickly and thoroughly. Sure, it wasn't technically 100% accurate. The exact wording was off, and the way Achiko delivered her arguments was different from how script Achiko did it. But it was accurate enough to freak her out. What didn't help was at the end it said. And then Achiko stared at the script wide-eyed in shock and slight terror. A bit of trolling on the younger girl's part. This is insane. Achiko told her. Of course, it is. Did you forget that I'm an OPC too? Yonda reminded her. I'm a child that the government thought was too dangerous to be part of society without help. I can't punch down buildings like Kiba, knock down forests like Kai, or set everything on fire like Netsu. This is what makes me so scary. Funny enough, Achiko often would forget that Yonda was an OPC. She never broke anything, or set anything on fire, or dissolved anything in acid. But now she'd never forget it. I don't really like showing people this side of me, because it makes it harder for me to get what I want. But I don't mind it if it's you. I like you, Yonda told her. And I owe you after I used you like I did. I want you to know me even better. So, how about we have a long talk? Achiko gave her an apprehensive look. On one hand, this girl made her very uncomfortable. She just didn't agree with the way she looked at things, and how she handled things. But at the same time, she was a little girl, whose quirk made her look at the world in an entirely different way. And it's not like she was a bad person, or wanted to do bad or selfish things. Maybe if she understood her more, she'd be able to feel more comfortable around her. Okay then, what do you want to talk about first? Achiko asked her. And Yonda gave her the widest smile yet. Chapter 100, Mentors. Who? Sansan shouted with joy as she swung from the trees in the forest, stretching out her body to make tendrils to allow her to swing from the trees. Alongside her was Fu, using Kyosei to swing. Nara's Wildvine was stretching her plant-like arms to swing, and surprisingly enough, Yami was also swinging with them. Yami had 2 new Grimm strapped to his arms that he'd created recently called lickers. They were like large chameleons, with very long spiked tongues. Using those tongues, Yami was able to swing around like the rest of them. Or at the very least, try. Snap. Thud. Yami had one of his lickers grab onto a branch with their tongue, only for it to snap, causing him to fall to the ground on his back. Ow wow. Yami groaned in pain, stinging pain resonating throughout his body from his spine. And that's when Siro, who had been in front of everyone, swung back around and landed next to Yami. Hey kid, you alright? Yes, Yami answered, taking Siro's hand, allowing him to pick him up. Not good at this. No is when they start off, Siro said, dusting off Yami's back. When I first started doing this I fell on my butt more times than I can remember. It's all about learning. Siro then turned Yami towards the branch that Yami had tried to swing off of. You see that? That branch was too small for you to grab onto. When you attach to something, you need it to be big and sturdy. Enough not just to support your weight, but also your acceleration. And you need to find it really quickly. The moment you attach onto something, you need to find the next thing, or even better, you need to know in advance. Sounds hard, Yami commented, looking down at his lickers, wondering if he could really do this. It is, but like I said, you just need to practice. Siro told him, putting a hand on his shoulder and giving him a large grin. Yami looked up at him and gathered his resolve. Okay. Hey guys, not to rush you, but my transformation only lasts so long. Nara reminded them from up in the trees. Then Su and Ken as Wildmutt jumped past them, the 2 of them practicing jumping around. Ken looked at Nara, gave her a weird laugh, stuck out his tongue, before jumping after Su. Sorry. We're going, Siro said, before using his tape to pull him up, and then starting to swing. Yami took a second, looking for a thick sturdy branch, before finding it after a few seconds, and using his lickers to once again take to the trees. XXXXXXXXXXXX. So that's why rabbits are so shy, Kay said. Kay and Koda were currently sitting together in the library at one of the tables, with tons of books in front of them, all about various animals. Koda smiled happily at her and nodded. He was quite fond of Kay. She was a happy, animal-loving cinnamon roll. And it was great teaching her about animals. Although he still didn't talk all that much. He just didn't like speaking, which was ironic considering his quirk. He mostly just pointed out some stuff in the books they were reading and said as little as he thought he could get away with while explaining things to her. The look on Kay's face, that brilliant smile as she learned something new, it honestly made him consider teaching. Obviously, he would never actually do that, because the idea of teaching a class terrified him, but it was nice to think about for a second. Oh, can I learn about cats next? Kay said, spotting a book about felines, grabbing it, and then holding it up, looking at Kota with that same eager smile, and all her snicks looking at him with anticipation. Kota smiled back and nodded, as the two opened the book and started learning. XXXXXXXXXX. Ha! Kiba shouted, as she delivered a punch to a dummy. Do you have to shout so loudly? Kota muttered beside her, doing the same kind of punch. Kiba, you're putting too much force into it. It'll leave you wide open if you miss. Ojiro told her from the side. Kiba, Kota, and Yami were all in the training room, practicing moves on dummies, under Ojiro's instruction and supervision. Everyone, do it again. Another 50 times. Ojiro told them. 50 times. Kota gave him a wide-eyed look. Repetition is important when learning martial arts, Ojiro told them. The more you do something, the easier it is, and the less you have to think about it. There is no shortcut when it comes to learning this. If you want to be able to do what I do, you have to train until you collapse. Ugh. Kota groaned. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you didn't actually want to be a hero. Kiba pointed out, giving Kota a confused look. So why are you here? Just because I want to learn how to defend myself, doesn't mean I want to be a hero. Kota scoffed, giving Kiba a pointed glare. This boy's emotions are all over the place. Yami thought. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXX. Ding. Alright, kids, the cakes are done. Let's take him out and see how well you did. Sato said to his students. Those students consisted of Eri, Kei, Kyoku, Yami, Shiruku, Yanda, and of course Fuku, in her hoodie. All 8 of them were in the kitchen, learning from Sato to make some sweets, cake in particular. Remember kids, be careful when you take it out, you don't want to get burned, Sato warned, as the kids equipped oven mitts. Watch out for your forearms and elbows, if you're not paying attention they'll touch the stove. They opened the oven, and all of them took their cakes out. All the cakes looked fine, all of them having done this before, so they didn't make any obvious mistakes that would be noticeable at first glance. Alright. Good job kids. All the cakes look stable, nothing crumbling, falling apart, or burnt. So far so good. Sato said as he inspected the cakes, the kids putting them on a nearby table as he did so. Now, for the taste test. Sato took out a fork and started taking a chunk out of everyone's cake to taste it. A bit too sweet, Sato said as he tasted Eri's cake. You put a bit too much sugar, don't worry, you'll get it right next time. Sato proceeded to do this to all the kids' cakes, judging them and giving them pointers. He got to Fuku's cake and took a bite. Great job Fuku. This is perfect. Really? Fuku asked him in slight disbelief. Are you sure there wasn't anything I mess up? Nah, this is great. I'm gonna have to start teaching you more advanced stuff. Sato said, giving her a huge grin, and giving her a head pat, causing the girl to get very flustered. Sato then moved on to Shiruku's cake and took a bite. And the spider girl winced when she saw Sato's face scrunch up in disgust. Is it that bad? I think you mixed up the salt and the sugar. Sato told her, seeing Shiruku look down in despair. Don't worry, it's an easy mistake. Lots of people make it. Why yeah, I think I even did that once, Fuku said, trying to reassure her. Shiruku, why are you taking a sudden interest in making a cake? You can't eat anything but flesh and spiders. Yanda asked. Actually, while we're on that topic, why can you only eat those 2 things? Spiders aren't exclusively cannibals, so why are you? Oh, that's actually because of an eating disorder I have, Shiruku explains. As for why I'm interested in cakes, well, I discovered all the interesting ways people make art out of their cakes, and I really wanted to try it. Also, I felt I needed to find more hobbies aside from making clothes. Well, I'm sure you'll get the hang of it soon. Sato encouraged her. Now, everyone, let's move on to the next part. XXXXXXXXX. Ah! Fuku screamed at the TV, as she tried her very best to keep from expelling her gas. Come on Fuku, you can do it. Mina cheered her on, her voice slightly muffled by her gas mask. Don't give up. Eri and Kei cheered, also wearing gas masks, both of them on either side of her holding one of her hands. The four of them were participating in Fuku's quirk training. It was a simple process. Gather in Fuku's room, and watch horror movies with her. Fuku's goal was to stay as calm as possible and learn how to keep her quirk under control while stressed. Fuku could feel her quirk trying to activate, the gas trying to explode out of her, as her heart pounded rapidly. Breathe girl, breathe. Mina reminded her. Fuku did so, taking deep breaths, and squeezing Kei and Eri's hands, trying to keep from bursting. Remember, it's just a movie, look at how fake that blood is. Mina pointed out. And that body is definitely made of plastic. That's right, Fuku said, finally starting to calm down. She took a few more breaths, and her heartbeat went back to normal, she could feel her own quirk calming down. And just as she was feeling relieved. Ah! Screeched the TV as mass jumpscare happened in the movies. And then the room filled with gas. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. I think we've got it now, Atsu said. Looks good to me, Fu confirmed. Currently, Su and Fu were in the forest, both of them had one of their hands on a tree. And those hands were both invisible. Su had realized that she could change the color of her skin to match her surroundings, and wanted to see if she could camouflage herself like some frogs. She's also brought along Fu and Kyosei, as Kyosei could also change color on a whim, and as such he should be able to do the same thing. And after spending a few hours trying, they'd finally managed to make their hands practically invisible. Finally. We'll have to learn how to do this much faster if we want to use this during a fight. Fu noted. Yeah, it'll be best to practice on as many different surfaces as possible, Su advised, before looking down at her outfit. But I'll have to get a special outfit that'll camouflage with me. Is that possible? Fu asked. Isn't the whole reason Hagakure has to run around nude because they can't make a costume that goes with her quirk? Camouflage and invisibility are different, Su explained. You can still see someone when they're camouflaged. It's just very difficult. But you can't see an invisible person at all. This is why it's easier to make a camouflaging costume than it is to make an invisible one. I see. Fu absorbed that information and made a note to look up more things that made camouflage and invisibility different and how light related to them. For now let's practice camouflaging while moving, Su told them. And such, with the rest of her day, decided the two of them put all their efforts into camouflage training. XXXXXXXXXXXXXX. Shinso and Ken were in the training room, staring at each other while Fu watched in the corner. Ken was currently in his upgrade form, meaning he was staring down at the older boy. Are you ready? Shinso asked him. You bet. Go ahead and try it. Ken responded. After that, there was a long silence that lasted for a couple minutes, before Ken spoke up. Did you try it? Ken asked. Are you mind-controlled? Shino asked him, trying again to activate his quirk on him. Nope, Ken responded. How about now? Shinso asked, trying again. Still not mind-controlled. Ken reiterated. Well, it looks like your hunch was right. Shinso revealed. My quirk has no effect on you like this. Alright. I'm mind control proof. Ken cheered, jumping up and celebrating this new revelation. Interesting, Fu said, taking notes on this new discovery. This whole experiment came about when Fu was discussing with Ken about how organic the techno-organic upgrade was. Then while Fu was working on his notes, he found one of his notes on Shinso and wondered if Shinso's quirk would work on upgrade. And thus, this happened. So it appears that upgrade is more robotic than organic, Fu noted. Meaning Shinso's quirk won't have any effect on him. Wonderful. I hate robots, Shinso said, recalling his terrible experience with the UA entrance exam. He got in, but boy was it hard. Well then, I wonder how well Shinso will do against an opponent he can't use his quirk on, Fu said, looking up at Ken. Ken then looked at Shinso and tried to crack his non-existent knuckles. Well, what do you say, Shinso? Think you can take me? Shinso sighed. Well, I can't very well run away from a fight from a 10-year-old. So I guess my hands are tied. Maybe since he won't have any technology around to control and I can actually beat him. Shinso thought. Great. Now dodge. This was all the warning Ken gave him, before shooting a laser out of his eye which nailed Shinso in the chest. Gah! Shinso grunted as he was slammed into a wall by the laser. Oh. His chest was smoking and slightly burned, and his back hurt from being slammed so hard into a metal wall. Never mind. He shoots lasers apparently. Shinso groaned as he got up, and got ready to start the fight. Time to get my ass kicked. XXXXXXXXXX. Izuku smiled as he looked at the cameras. Class 1A, true to their word, was giving it their all for the kids. Jiro and Kaminari were currently teaching Ken and Otoko how to play instruments. Specifically, Otoko wanted to learn how to play the drums and Ken wanted to play the electric guitar. Momo and Sue were helping tutor Yami, Kei, and Sanson. And Achiko was showing Eri, Kyoku, and Yanda how to make birdhouses. It filled Izuku's heart to watch his kids growing closer to others and learning new things. And he hoped to see the same kind of thing more and more, for years to come. But for that to happen, he'd need to take care of one issue. Izuku looked down at one of the other cameras, which showed Aoyama doing the laundry. Chapter 101, In the Mind of a Traitor. So, is anyone else wondering why all of us are here? Toru asked. Toru, Kirishima, Aoyama, and Yanda were all in a car, being driven by none other than All Might himself in his skinny form. You're here to escort me around the city, while I go sightseeing. Yanda told them. You know this already. Yeah, but it's a bit weird that all three of us were called for this, Toru noted. Feels a bit like overkill. Don't worry about it, young Hagakure. Young Midoriya is probably just very concerned about her safety, you know how paranoid he can get. Yagi said dismissively. Of course, All Might knew that was not the case. No, this wasn't an ordinary drive, but rather it was a police investigation. After Yanda had told Izuku that Aoyama was giving information to All for One about U.A, and Izuku gave that information to the police, several things happened in quick succession. First, that put Yanda through several honesty tests, which revealed that she was in fact being totally truthful about Aoyama. They also discovered that she drugged Aoyama and maliciously used her quirk on him, which normally would have gotten her in some legal trouble, however they were more than willing to overlook that. Second was that they needed to figure out what their next course of action was. Izuku had wanted to take Aoyama out of his house for obvious reasons, however, the police in UA advised against that, as they didn't know the exact situation, and it was possible taking any obvious or drastic actions could end very badly. So instead they'd just keep very, very close watch of him, giving him tasks that would keep him within view of the cameras at all times. Once that was decided, they then needed to find a way to make sure that Aoyama was 100% the traitor. Because while Yanda's evidence was pretty damning, it was also legally unusable, and it was still possible that she was wrong. And that's where today's events would come into play. Crash. Suddenly a car impacted them from behind, causing them to jut forward. What the heck? Toru shouted, having been startled by the sudden collision. Just in time. All Might thought. XXXXXXXXXXX. After parking on the side of the road, All Might, Yanda, and the students came out of their car, as well as the people from the car that hit them. An old man and woman. Or at least that's what they looked like. In actuality, the woman was a policewoman, and the man was none other than Detective Naomasa, both of them in disguise. "Oh my, I'm so sorry." The old woman apologized frantically to All Might. "I'm not as alert as I used to be, and so I accidentally made such a horrible mistake." "Ha ha ha. Don't worry about it, looks like your car took more damage than mine," All Might said, reciting the script that they'd come up with. "Perhaps it's time you put those driving skills to rest." While All Might and the undercover officer went through their scripted dialogue, Naomasa made his move on Aoyama, who was standing by the students. My, what a strapping young man you are," Naomasa said, to Aoyama, acting like a kindly old man. "Why, you could be a hero with a body like that." "Ah. Well, kind monsieur, I actually happen to be a hero in training," Aoyama said. "Yeah, we all are," Toru explained cheerfully. "Oh, is that right?" Naomasa responded in his old man voice, giving them all a kindly smile. "Well, it's nice to know such nice young lads and ladies will be protecting us in the future. Some people looking to get into the hero business get wrapped up with some dangerous folks. Some might call them villains. I'm sure none of you would ever work with people like that, right?" "No way," Toru said immediately. "Yeah, that's super unmanly," Kirishima said. "Of course not." Aoyama paused for a moment, trying to hide his nervousness. "Someone such as myself would never associate with dirty criminals." Lie. And there it was, the damning proof that Aoyama was working for or with, if not all for one, some kind of villain. It was almost definitely all for one based on Yanda's statements, although they had no proof of that at the moment. Either way, at the very least, they had enough proof to launch a full investigation, although it would still have to be kept a secret. If they played their cards right, then they might be able to use this against All for One. They'd gotten what they were there for, it was time to go. Naomasa reached into his pocket and pressed a button that was hidden in there. This would cause a small vibration in the pocket of the female officer, signaling that they were done here, as well as contact Izuku, to tell him to move to the next stage. "Ah, well, it looks like we're done here, kids," All Might told them, as the officer went back to her car. "Everything's been sorted out, we dash." And right on cue, All Might's phone buzzed, showing he got a text from Izuku. "Oh, looks like there's been a change of plans," All Might told them. "Young Midoriya wants us to come back. He wants to take Yonda to the park himself, and young Uraraka will be escorting them." "Really? We just left?" Toru said, wearing a confused expression that no one could see. "Don't worry about it," All Might told them. Honestly, felt a bit bad keeping 1A in the dark about there being a traitor in their mix, but it was necessary to make sure Aoyama didn't find out. But he had a feeling it was only going to get harder from here. XXXXXXXXXXX. "Why are we going to a police station?" Achiko asked. It was now about an hour later, and now Izuku, Yonda, and Achiko were all riding in All Might's car, heading towards the police station. "Don't worry about it," Izuku told her. Something was wrong. Achiko could tell. Both Izuku and All Might looked tense. Nervous. Like something terrible either had happened or was going to. "Just sit tight, Achiko, it will be taken care of." In contrast to both of them, Yonda looked completely calm. Which honestly didn't make Achiko feel any better. If she learned one thing about Yonda is that she did not like feeling valuable or like she didn't have some kind of control over the situation, so her being calm meant very little. Achiko thought for a minute, looking at the people around her, and came up with something. "Does this have something to do with that super secret piece of information Yonda found out?" "You told her." All Might gave Izuku a shocked look for a moment, before remembering where he was and looking back at the road. "No, I just told her that Yonda found out something important," Izuku told him. "Nothing more." "So it is about that," Achiko said, taking All Might's reaction as a confirmation. "Yes, but as I told you earlier, we can't tell you about it," Izuku reiterated. "We needed to bring you here to make the cover story believable, but you won't be getting involved with it." Okay, if it's so dangerous then why is Yonda still involved? Achiko asked. I get that she was the one who found out whatever it was, but is it necessary for her to still be involved in whatever this was? Izuku sighed. He wished he could do that. He really wished he could just leave Yonda out of this. But the girl tended to get involved even when she wasn't wanted. And since Aoyama wasn't leaving their house, Yonda could always get more info out of him. And as long as Yonda could get useful info, she was useful to this case. Of course, Izuku couldn't tell her that, so instead he had to respond with, "It's complicated. Please believe me when I say that I wish I could tell you, but I just can't." Izuku turned around to look her in the eyes, and the two stared at each other for a while, Achiko taking in the sincerity in Izuku's eyes. Okay. Achiko leaned back, letting out all of the tension she'd been holding on to. I trust you. Thank you. Really, thank you so much. Izuku said, giving her a relieved smile. Well, we're here, Yagi said, as he parked outside the station. Alright, let's get this over with. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. Alright, now that everyone is here, I believe it is time to start, Nizu said. Currently, Izuku and Yonda were inside of a small police meeting room, alongside Detective Naomasa, All Might, in buff form now, Aizawa, and Nizu. Nizu was at the front of the room, with a chalkboard behind him. We now have confirmation that Aoyama is at the very least working with a villain, Naomasa said. And given Yonda's statements, we're almost certain that it's All for One. Meaning that All for One is in fact not dead. All Might clenched his fist in the back. How could I have such a mistake? How could I have been so naive? I shouldn't have just smashed his head. I should have kept punching until there was nothing left. As he was thinking that, Yonda smiled. She'd always known All Might wasn't as pure as the propaganda would lead you to believe. Even he had to have violent, angry thoughts. Even he thought about doing some less than noble things. Because purity was a thing that could only exist in children. And even then it was extremely rare. It was nice to get that confirmation. From what Yonda has told us, he's been giving information about UA to All for One, Nizu said, before turning to Yonda. Ms. Yonda, do you have anything else you'd like to share with us? Of course. Yonda said, her face lighting up as she finally got to show the fruits of her labor. Well, first off, I'm almost 100% sure that he's an unwilling traitor. As in he's being forced? Aizawa asked, making sure to think his question as well as ask it out loud so everyone could hear the conversation. You can tell by the tone of his thoughts. When I catch him thinking about being the traitor, he sounds deeply upset. Like he's being forced to do something he absolutely does not want to do. When he thinks about his classmates, he never sounds angry with them, or like he despises them secretly, or like he doesn't care about them at all. I have caught him thinking sadly about them like he did or is doing something to hurt them. And whenever he thinks about being a future hero, or a student of UA or a hero student in general, I can detect this underlying sense of shame and guilt. All this points to him being forced into giving up information. Very good, Ms. Yonda. Nizu praised her. Using a person's tone to detect hidden meanings is a very smart use of your quirk. However, I do hope you haven't still been influencing his emotions with those candies, otherwise, we can't be certain this information is accurate. Yonda shook her head. Father has kept those candies far out of my reach. Literally, he keeps them on a tall shelf I am physically incapable of reaching. Very good. Nizu nodded. But that begs the question, how is he being forced? Aizawa asked. My guess would be his parents. Yonda added. Whenever he thinks of them, he thinks such kind things, but in such a sad, and even fearful tone. Like they're in danger. My guess is that All for One is threatening them, saying he'll kill them if Aoyama doesn't cooperate. She's 8 and yet she's already a more efficient investigator than some of our own officers. Naomasa thought. Thank you. Yonda said to Naomasa, giving him a bright smile, causing Naomasa to jump a bit as he forgot she could hear him for a second. Interesting. I think I have a theory as to how this all started, Nizu said. You see, as I was doing research on Aoyama, I found something interesting. Aoyama was reportedly a very late bloomer. After months of his quirk not appearing, he was taken to the doctors, where he was diagnosed as quirkless. Izuku's eyes went wide. Quirkless? His parents had multiple tests done afterward, and their call came out the same. Everything pointed to Aoyama being quirkless. Nizu continued. Until a little over a year later, when suddenly Aoyama had navel laser. What's more, I can't find any trace of a quirk similar to navel laser in his family tree, and Aoyama's quirk is incompatible with his body. You're saying that All for One gave him navel laser? Naomasa asked, taking some notes. It's a very distinct possibility. My leading theory is that Aoyama was diagnosed as quirkless, and after seeing their son being treated worse and worse by others because of it, they decided they needed to fix this at any cost. So they used the plentiful resources of the Aoyama family to contact All for One and get him a quirk. In exchange, Aoyama would act as a spy for him, otherwise, his parents would be killed. Nizu said, explaining his theory to the room. So, Aoyama's not actually a bad person? Izuku asked, hoping that this was the case. If Aoyama was being forced to spill information, it implied he wasn't the type of person to do anything harmful to his kids while he was in his home. At least not of his own accord. And while that didn't completely put his mind at ease, it relaxed him just a little bit. It's unlikely that he is. Yonda chimed in. From what I've gathered, he seems to be a genuinely good person, with a steady moral compass. He was just put in a truly awful situation. So, how are we gonna go about this? Aizawa asked. Well, we still won't be confronting Aoyama or his parents directly, Nizu explained. All for One is not one for loose ends, and if he sees that we've made a move on the Aoyamas, he may decide to put an end to their lives. And besides, we may find more use for them. For now, we simply need to monitor the Aoyama family. We'll install cameras and wiretaps in their house, and make sure to bug their phones. We don't make a move on them until All for One has been handled. And afterward? All Might asked. That depends. If our assumptions prove correct, and none of this information gets out, then we'll charge his parents for everything. Nizu said. Aoyama, if we are correct, had no real choice in this situation, out the ultimatum, do what I say or your parents die. It'd be completely unfair for us to actually hold accountable for actions outside of his control. Even if that's the case, Aoyama did still feed information to an enemy of the country. The chief is going to object heavily to him getting off scot-free. Naomasa sighed. I'm sure he will, and he can feel free to do what he normally does whenever we do something he doesn't agree with, Nizu said. Lay down and roll over. Yeah, I figured that'd be the case. Naomasa shook his head. Meanwhile, Izuku was just rubbing his temples. He really didn't want Yonda to witness this abuse of power done by law enforcement for the sake of a greater good, because that would likely only affirm her troublesome mindset. But also he didn't disagree with what they were doing, so it's not like he could even object to it. Yonda patted him on the back. It's okay, father, nothing that's happening here is something I didn't already expect. That's kind of the problem. Izuku thought, shaking his head. Well then, with that said, I think we're all done here, Nizu announced. Mr. Midoriya, please keep a close eye on Aoyama while he is under your household. We apologize for the inconvenience and stress this brings you, and will compensate you as soon as he leaves, Naomasa said. Bribery, another thing he didn't want Yonda around. You should take the money, father, maybe you'll be able to buy Kiba that castle she always wanted. Yonda joked, before flipping through her notepad. Also, we're not quite done here. I have some things you may want to hear. Firstly, Officer Fairu was thinking some very inappropriate things about my quote-unquote tiny adorable mouth. So while he is definitely attracted to kids, I can't tell if he's actually done anything illegal yet, so may want to keep an eye on him. Officer Rand is a domestic abuser, Officer Yo is being domestically abused. Officer Kusuri is addicted to meth, and lastly, Officer Retta is having suicidal thoughts. Oh, for fuck's sake. Naomasa pinched the bridge of his nose, as he now had a lot, and he meant a lot more work to do. Did you come in here looking for this stuff? Izuku asked her, also completely exasperated. Of course, I came here looking for problems. This a police station, it's full of problems. Yonda said like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Now that was a problematic statement, and not one Izuku was prepared to deal with at the moment. Naomasa was just shaking his head at how unfortunately true that was. I'll leave those issues in your hands, Naomasa, Niza said to the detective. Naomasa rubbed the sides of his head, as he knew that those cases were going to take up quite a large amount of his time, especially since he didn't have any evidence to start a proper investigation, and had to do his own private, and illegal, investigations himself before he could even get started on tackling these. Yonda's quirk was extremely useful for finding out that crimes were happening, but it put them in a huge bind legally, as they couldn't use any of her information as evidence of any kind. It was pretty frustrating, to say the least. At least for him. At the very least, Yonda knew the difference between an exaggerated thought that someone might have like I want to kill my boss that didn't mean anything, and the thoughts that actually meant people might be, or are definitely going to or have already committed a crime, or was a victim in some way. This girl definitely had a bright future with intelligence like that, but she's gonna be in for a headache if she wanted to get into a law enforcement job. Well, with that said, I think we're done here, Niza said. Mr. Midoriya, if you could please pick up Ms. Uraraka in the lobby, then you'll be free to head home. We will inform you if there are any urgent changes in the case, while Aoyama is under your roof. Thank you. Izuku nodded, getting up, and looking down at Yonda. Let's go home, Yonda. Of course, father. Yonda said, taking his hand, as the two left the room. After waiting for Yonda to get farther away. Nizu thought this. What an interesting girl. I'm very curious to see where her future goes. That will be it for this part. I hope everyone enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like and comment if you want part 20. If you want to hear more from me, subscribe. I hope to see you all in the next one.